Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The night before Grandpa Harold's will reading, I sat in my apartment in Boulder and ate leftover pasta at my kitchen counter while my cat, Miso, knocked a pen off the edge and watched it fall with complete satisfaction. I had a deposition to prepare for the following morning, my own case, not the will reading, and a conference call with a client in Phoenix at 7 a.m. My life was full and quiet and mine. I had built it that way carefully, the way you build something when you know no one is coming to help you. I wasn't nervous about the will reading. That probably sounds strange given everything that would happen inside that conference room. But I had known what Grandpa Harold intended since the afternoon in October 2019 when he called me from his study and said, "Vanessa, I need you to drive me somewhere and I need you not to tell your mother." We drove to the Denver County Recorder's office together. He wore his brown cardigan with the missing button on the left sleeve. He carried a manila folder. We were there for 45 minutes. When we walked back to my car, he squeezed my hand and said, "Now it's done. Don't lose those copies." I didn't lose them. My grandfather, Harold Eugene Mercer, was a man who built things slowly and kept them. He'd purchased his first Denver property, a 4-unit rental on Gilpin Street, in 1978. Working overtime at the sheet metal plant to save the down payment while my grandmother raised their 2 kids in a 2-bedroom rental nearby. Over the following 30 years he added properties when the numbers made sense and never when they didn't. By the time I was in high school he owned 9 rental units across Denver and the Wash Park neighborhood, plus the main family estate on Claremont Street. A 1920s craftsman on half an acre with original hardwood floors, a finished carriage house and a vegetable garden that produced more zucchini than any 4 people could reasonably consume. My grandmother died in 2014. After that, Grandpa Harold's world got smaller in some ways and clearer in others. He started calling me more often. We'd talk about tenants and city ordinances and what the city was planning for the light rail expansion. He asked about my law school coursework with genuine interest, the kind that required follow-up questions. He remembered which professor I liked and which one talked over his students. My mother, Diane, and her brother, my Uncle Tom, had a specific understanding of Grandpa Harold, that he was sentimental, easily influenced, and needed protecting from his own generosity. This understanding justified a great many things they did over the years, most of which they considered helpful. My sister Jessica had a simpler understanding, that she was the favorite, that this had always been true, and that it would be reflected accordingly when the time came. Jessica is 5 years older than me. Growing up, she had the louder personality, the easier social grace, the laugh that filled a room. She was the one who remembered birthdays with elaborate Instagram tributes and showed up to family events with bakery boxes and the right bottle of wine. She knew how to make Grandpa Harold feel visited without the visit requiring anything real from her. She learned this the way some people learn languages. Not through study but through instinct, effortlessly and early. I was quieter. I asked Grandpa Harold questions about his tenants by name and whether the boiler issue on Gilpin had been resolved. I helped him update his lease agreements when Colorado changed its landlord-tenant statutes in 2021. I drove him to his cardiologist appointments after he decided he didn't trust the parking at the medical complex. I wasn't doing these things to accumulate credit. I was doing them because I liked being around him, and because he was the one person in my family who seemed genuinely interested in who I actually was rather than who they'd decided I was. What they'd decided I was: overly serious, probably jealous of Jessica, too career-focused to understand that family came first, and my mother's particular contribution, ungrateful in some ambient way that she could never quite specify but felt deeply. I had graduated from University of Colorado Law at 26, passed the bar on my first attempt, and joined a mid-sized Denver firm as an associate focusing on real estate and estate law. I made partner track in 4 years, which was considered fast. I had 3 long-term clients who sent me referrals regularly. I coached a Tuesday night women's soccer league and was genuinely mediocre at it, which I considered a healthy corrective to being good at most things I worked at. I had a close friend named Priya who had known me since undergraduate orientation and who called my family a case study in motivated perception. I had Miso who was indifferent to my accomplishments in a way I found clarifying. None of this registered in my family as success exactly. It registered as fine. As, well, Vanessa always had her nose in a book, didn't she? As, Jessica got married and gave us grandchildren, so let's talk about what Jessica is doing. Jessica's husband, Brad, worked in commercial real estate sales. They had 2 sons and a large house in Cherry Hills Village, and a lifestyle that I had understood for several years was being subsidized in ways they did not discuss openly. The boys were 8 and 6 and genuinely delightful. I took them to the Natural History Museum twice a year and let them order the large milkshakes. That relationship, with Oliver and Sam, was the part of my family life I would have done anything to preserve. Grandpa Harold's health declined over 2022 and into 2023. His cardiologist used the word managed more carefully. Harold himself became more deliberate in a way I recognized. He was a man who did not rush decisions but, once made, did not revisit them. He called me in April 2023 and asked me to review his existing will with him. Not to change it, just to read it together. We sat at his kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and he walked through the document section by section, asking questions a man with genuine uncertainty asks, and questions a man testing comprehension also asks. At the end he set it down and said, "Your mother is going to push Jessica to contest anything she doesn't like." I said I knew. He said, "That's why 2019 matters." He died in February 2024 at 81, in his own house, in the room where he had slept for 46 years. I was with him. My mother and Jessica arrived 40 minutes after. There was a version of that moment where I resented the 40 minutes. I didn't. Those 40 minutes were between me and Harold, and I considered them a gift. The will reading was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the funeral, at the offices of Gerald Whitmore Askew, the estate attorney my grandfather had used for 20 years. Gerald was a precise, unhurried man of 60-something who wore bow ties and kept a miniature cactus collection on his windowsill. I had spoken with him twice in the preceding weeks on unrelated matters. The kind of professional conversations that don't need to be explained to anyone. I arrived 8 minutes early and took the seat at the far end of the conference table, closest to the window. The Boulder Flatirons were faintly visible on a clear day from that side of the building. It was not a clear day. My mother arrived with Jessica. Uncle Tom came in behind them. Brad waited in the lobby with the boys, which I was glad for. My cousin Renee, Tom's daughter, sat beside her father with a notebook, which told me she'd been told to take notes. Jessica was dressed for the occasion. A structured black dress, her hair blown out, the specific appearance of someone who had imagined this day for a long time and had prepared accordingly. She greeted Gerald warmly. She touched his arm when she laughed at something. My mother sat across from me and did not make eye contact for the first 4 minutes. Gerald opened the session formally, reviewed the document's execution date and confirmed its legal validity. Then he nodded at Jessica, who had apparently arranged in advance to read the primary bequest aloud herself, a staging choice that told you everything. Jessica lifted the page. Her voice actually did shake. Not from grief, I think, but from the physical sensation of having waited for this for years and now holding it. "Grandpa's will names me as sole heir to the Denver estate and all associated holdings," she read, though that wasn't quite what the will said. She was paraphrasing in her own favor, summarizing rather than reading. "Vanessa gets nothing." My mother put her arm around Jessica's shoulders. Uncle Tom started clapping. Actually clapping, a slow and satisfied 3-beat applause as though he'd just witnessed a winning putt. Renee wrote something in her notebook. I sat at the end of the table with my hands folded and said nothing for a moment. I looked at Gerald, who had not started clapping, whose expression had not changed at all. I said, "Before the attorney continues, ask him to check the county recorder's office for a 2019 filing." Jessica laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone who has won and wants to make sure you understand you've lost. "What 2019 filing?" Gerald had already turned to his computer. He was a man who, when asked to verify something by an estate attorney present in a professional capacity, verified it without theater. His eyes moved across the screen. He scrolled. He stopped scrolling. He typed something. He stopped typing. The room was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than any moment has a right to. My sister screamed, not words at first, just a sharp involuntary sound, the kind the body produces when the ground it was certain of suddenly isn't there. Then words. "What is that? What is that?" Let me tell you what it was. In October 2019, Harold Eugene Mercer, acting with full legal capacity and with the assistance of a Denver real estate attorney, not Gerald Whitmore, a separate attorney specifically retained to avoid any appearance of conflict, executed a series of quitclaim deeds transferring title of all 9 rental properties to Vanessa Ruth Mercer, held in an irrevocable family trust established the same day. The Claremont Street estate was transferred separately via a recorded deed with right of survivorship, effective upon Harold's death. The documents were filed with the Denver County Recorder's Office on October 14, 2019, and assigned recording numbers that were, as of this Thursday morning, in a law office conference room, publicly searchable by anyone with internet access. The total assessed value of the transferred portfolio at time of death, $4.2 million. The total value of anything remaining in Grandpa Harold's probate estate, to be distributed per the will Jessica had just read aloud with her voice shaking. Approximately $180,000 in liquid accounts, a 2017 Ford F-150, and the contents of the house. The will was valid. It just didn't govern what she thought it governed. "This isn't possible," my mother said. The arm she'd had around Jessica's shoulder dropped. "I want a different attorney," Jessica said to Gerald, who had done nothing wrong. "Harold has been manipulated," Uncle Tom said, which was the thing Tom had been waiting to say for years, and which he now deployed regardless of the fact that the filing in question was 5 years old. Gerald removed his glasses, set them on the table, and waited for the room to find a lower volume. When it did, he explained with the patience of a man who has read many wills to many families and has seen most varieties of human response, that the quitclaim deeds and trust instrument were matters of public record, that they predated the will, and that under Colorado property law, property transferred out of an estate prior to death was not subject to probate distribution regardless of what a subsequent will stated. "She manipulated him," Jessica said, pointing at me. "She got to him when he was declining." I said, "Harold was in excellent cognitive health in 2019. His cardiologist will confirm that." The independent attorney who drafted the instruments, not Gerald, a separate attorney specifically selected so that no conflict could be claimed, will also confirm it. But if you'd like to pursue a challenge, I'd encourage you to speak to a probate litigator first. I can give you several names. This was not sarcasm. I genuinely could give them several names. I knew most of the probate litigators in Denver. "You planned this," my mother said. I looked at her for a moment. She wasn't wrong exactly. Harold and I had planned it together, which is what people do when they want something done correctly. "Grandpa planned this," I said. "I helped him execute it. That's what he asked me to do." What happened over the next hour was the thing that happens when a family's shared story meets a document that contradicts it. The story loses. But stories don't lose quietly. Jessica called Brad from the hallway. I heard her voice at a pitch I associated with the worst moments of our childhood. Not quite crying but straining against it, full of a disbelief that was also, somewhere underneath, a reckoning. Brad came in from the lobby with Oliver and Sam, who immediately sensed the atmosphere and went very still the way children do, radar engaged, expressions careful. Oliver looked at me from across the room. He was 8. He'd inherited Brad's steady, watchful eyes. I gave him the smallest nod I could. He nodded back. Uncle Tom demanded to see the filing himself. Gerald turned his laptop. Tom read it with the concentration of a man hoping to find an error. He didn't find one. He handed the laptop back. My mother asked if there was any legal avenue to dispute the transfer. Gerald said she was welcome to consult with a probate attorney and that any such conversation was beyond the scope of today's proceedings. He said this without cruelty. He was simply a man who understood the limits of his role. At some point I opened my bag and removed my own folder. The physical copies Harold and I had kept, the trust instrument, the recorded deed confirmations, the letter Harold had written in his own hand to be opened at this meeting, which I had not mentioned until now. The letter was 4 paragraphs. Harold had written it in November 2023, 3 months before he died, when he was clear-eyed and deliberate and knew exactly what he was doing. In it he explained his reasons without apology. He said that he had watched for many years which of his grandchildren treated his properties as instruments of inheritance and which treated them as responsibilities. He said he had made his decision not in anger but in clarity. He said he trusted Vanessa to maintain what he had built and to be fair where fairness was earned. He said, "I know this will cause difficulty. I'm sorry for that. But I will not apologize for what is right." I read it aloud. Not to punish anyone. Because Harold had asked me to. When I finished, the room was quiet in a different way. Not the silence of shock, but the silence that follows something final. Here is what I need to tell you about my sister, because she deserves more than a flat portrait of someone who lost a fight over money. Jessica had spent 20 years believing a specific thing about herself and her place in this family, and that belief had been encouraged actively and repeatedly by our mother. She had organized her identity around being chosen. She had made decisions about Brad, about the Cherry Hills house, about the lifestyle that required more than Brad's sales commissions provided, based on an expectation she had been allowed to form, and that expectation had just been removed. I'm not saying she was right. I am saying I understand how someone becomes the person she had become, when the family architecture was built to produce exactly that person. What I learned later, through a source I'll get to, was that Jessica and Brad had taken out a second mortgage on the Cherry Hills house in 2022 specifically in anticipation of the inheritance. The number was $340,000. They had been counting on the Denver estate to absorb it. I didn't know this in the conference room. I found out 2 weeks later when Brad's business partner, a man named Collier who had his own reasons for wanting things to surface, forwarded me a set of bank documents and a note that said only, "Thought you should know the full picture." There was more in those documents than the second mortgage. Brad had been routing income from 2 of Grandpa Harold's rental properties he had nominally helped manage for 3 years at Harold's request, through a shell account. The total diverted, $214,000 over 31 months. Brad had apparently decided that managing properties entitled him to a fee he had never been offered and had never disclosed. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything. What I did first was call Priya, who listened to the whole thing from the second mortgage to the diverted rent income without interrupting, and then said, "So Brad has been stealing from a dead man's estate and your sister either knew or didn't want to know." I said I thought it was the second one. Priya said that's worse in some ways. I said I knew. I took Miso for a long walk. That wasn't a thing you do with cats, but she tolerated it when I needed to think. I thought about Oliver and Sam. I thought about what happened to 8-year-olds when their father was investigated for financial fraud. I thought about whether the right thing and the kind thing were the same thing and whether they ever were. They weren't this time. They weren't the same thing at all. I retained a forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia Delgado who worked with the law firm on financial crime matters and was meticulous in a way that left no room for interpretation. Patricia spent 3 weeks reviewing the rental income records Harold had kept, the bank accounts attached to the properties, and the documents Collier had forwarded. Her report ran 41 pages. Brad had diverted $214,000 in rental income between January 2021 and August 2023. He had not been subtle. He'd processed it through a business account he'd told Jessica was related to his sales work. The account had a name that sounded like a property management company but was not one. I brought the report to Gerald, who referred me to a colleague who handled financial crime matters. That colleague reviewed the documents and made a referral to the Denver DA's office. I also called my mother. It was the hardest call I made in this entire sequence of events. Not because I expected warmth, I didn't, but because I had to tell her something about the man her daughter had married that was going to rearrange everything she thought she knew about the last 3 years. And I had to do it as the person she already believed had orchestrated this whole situation for selfish reasons. My mother was silent for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "Does Jessica know about this call?" I said no. She said, "Don't tell her it came from you." That was not what I expected her to say. It meant she believed me. It meant somewhere underneath all of it she knew. 2 weeks later, Brad's attorney contacted mine. There were conversations I was not present for. The DA's office opened a formal inquiry. Brad, to his credit or his attorneys, did not try to deny the diversion once the forensic accounting was in front of him. He proposed restitution. Jessica found out the week after that. She called me at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was awake. I'm always awake at 11, working or reading or just existing at the kitchen counter with Miso. He didn't yell. That surprised me. She said, "Did you know before Collier sent you those documents?" I said no. She said, "Would you have done anything differently if you had?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "I don't know. Maybe I would have come to you first." She was quiet. Then she said, "The boys can still see you, right? That's not, I don't want them to lose you." I said no. They're not losing me. We stayed on the phone for a while without saying much. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something smaller and more honest than either of those things. Two people who had grown up in the same house, shaped by the same forces, arriving at the edge of something that couldn't be undone and deciding for the moment not to hang up. The Cherry Hills house went on the market in June. Jessica moved with the boys into a rental in Littleton. A decent school district, manageable commute. I found out through my mother, who had softened incrementally in the months following the will reading, not toward warmth exactly but toward a kind of careful civility that I accepted for what it was. Uncle Tom retained an attorney briefly and then did not. There was nothing to contest. Renee sent me a text 6 weeks after the will reading that said, "For what it's worth, I always thought it was unfair how your family treated you." I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it. There are things people say too late that are still true, and you have to decide whether the lateness disqualifies the truth. I decided it didn't. I texted back, "Thank you, Renee." The 9 rental properties were now legally mine, held in trust. I hired a professional property management company in April. Not Brad's fake one, an actual company, and they took over operations within 30 days. The carriage house on the Claremont Street estate I converted over the summer into a proper studio. I'm not an artist. I don't know yet what it will become. But Harold had always said the carriage house had potential and no one had ever done anything with it, and I decided that was an instruction. I kept the vegetable garden. The zucchini, as it turns out, is my problem now. I have been giving it to my neighbors, who are politely reaching the limits of their enthusiasm for zucchini. I am working on it. What I lost in all of this is harder to name than what I gained. I lost the version of my family where I was still waiting for them to see me. That version, the one where I kept my distance and my patience and thought that someday they'd recalibrate, that version ended in the conference room. You can't unknow what you know about people. You can love them anyway, and I do, in the partial and careful way that is the only honest option after certain things are said in certain rooms. But it's a different kind of love than the one I had before or thought I had. It's the kind you extend with open eyes. Priya came to Denver in August. We hiked part of the Flatirons Trail and ate too much at a Thai restaurant, and she told me about a man she was seeing in Austin who made her laugh and also made her nervous, which she said was the right combination. I told her about a case I was working on, a family dispute over a commercial property in Rhino, and she listened with genuine interest even though she's a software engineer and property law is not her world. That's the thing about Priya. She makes your world her interest. I don't take that for granted anymore. Oliver and Sam came for their museum visit in September, the first one since everything. Sam, the 6-year-old, was entirely unchanged. He wanted the milkshake and the dinosaurs and to know if any dinosaurs were also bugs, which is not how evolution works but is a genuinely interesting question. Oliver was quieter than usual for the first hour. Then, at the fossils exhibit, he stood in front of an ammonite and said without looking at me, "Is our family going to be okay?" I looked at him for a moment. I said, "I think your family is changing. That's different from not being okay." He considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old who is going to be a thoughtful person someday. He said, "Is it better or worse?" I said, "I don't know yet. But I'll still take you to the museum." He seemed to accept that. I drove them home to Littleton in the early evening with Sam asleep in the back seat and Oliver watching the mountains through the window. The sky was doing the thing it does in Colorado in September. That unreasonable, almost theatrical orange and rose behind the Rockies. And I thought about Harold, who had looked at this sky his whole adult life and built something worth leaving. Not just the properties, the clarity, the patience, the decision to pass things to the person who would carry them rather than the person who expected them. I thought about the brown cardigan with the missing button, the 45 minutes in the county recorder's office, the squeeze of his hand when we walked back to the car. I thought, I won't lose those copies. I still haven't.